For the 12 and a half years that Melville and I were in California, we lived a couple of hours from Sonoma County. At least once a year, we'd drive up to the Russian and Alexander Valleys for some wine tasting. I have mixed feelings about the wine industry. I certainly enjoy the occasional glass of wine. Yet, as a priest and as the granddaughter and niece of alcoholics, I've witnessed the harm addiction causes and the misuse of alcohol we saw in some of the tasting rooms, not all, always concerned us. I am grateful that those trips to wine country taught me something about grapevines, which I never learned in Ohio. Grapevines are climbers. The stems need to be staked, especially when the vines are young. In between the stakes are 3 or 4 wires. The tendrils of the plant grow out along those. The vine wants to put its energy into growing out with new branches and leaves. The vine grower wants the plant's energy focused on growing fruit, especially the ones closest to the stem. Those grapes have the strongest, most developed flavors. So the vine grower prunes the vine, directing its energy and growth into bearing the best fruit. Most plants need pruning only once a year, but grapevines need frequent pruning. Commercial vineyards prune their vines almost constantly, including branches that are already bearing fruit, so that the vine will produce even more fruit. Left on their own, grapevines become a tangled thicket. But a well-dressed grapevine is about chest height, no wider than it is tall, with heavy bunches of grapes maturing in the shade of its broad leaves. I said last week that the Gospel of John rewards the use of a wide-angle lens. John does not tell us anything in a few words. He takes an entire chapter or 2 or 3 to give us a complex, nuanced picture of Jesus' life and ministry. A typical gospel reading zooms in on 8 or 10 verses, but we need a wide angle to see the context of those verses. And that context is crucial for understanding the meaning of the reading. The image of the vine and the branches comes in the Last Supper. Jesus knows that his hour has come, the hour for his suffering, crucifixion, and resurrection. So he invites the 12 disciples to share one last meal with him. After they finish eating, Jesus gets up from the table, ties a towel around his waist, brings water and a basin, and washes the disciples' feet. It's a tender, intimate scene where Jesus shows the disciples what leadership means, what love means. When he's finished, Jesus sits back down and begins to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk some more. For 4.5 chapters, he talks. It's the longest speech of Jesus in the Gospels. It's known as the farewell discourse. Jesus has good reason to talk so much. He has told the disciples he is leaving them. He'll be with them only a little while longer. They are surprised, worried, frightened. The disciples have been following Jesus for 3 years, according to John. They don't know who they are without him, where they are going, how they will get there. Jesus offers them reassurance, and he tries to teach them everything they need to know to go on without him. He has so much to say, and only the one night in which to say it. Throughout John's gospel, Jesus has been teaching with I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd, among others. In the middle of the farewell discourse, Jesus gives his last I am. I am the true vine. As the vine, Jesus has been pruned by the vine grower. He's been supported by stakes and wires and trimmed back so that all his energy goes into bearing the best, most flavorful fruit. Heavy bunches of grapes ripen right next to his central stem. The disciples, too, have been pruned by Jesus' teaching. That word translated cleansed also means pruned. Through his words, the word of God in human flesh has been cutting back the tendrils that will take energy away from the disciples' fruit. He's been preparing them for this moment without their knowing it. The disciples are already growing into life on their own. But it will not be life without Jesus. It can't be life without Jesus because he is the vine and the disciples are the branches. Any branch that doesn't abide in the vine withers and is thrown away. We often hear that as a word of judgment, but Jesus is only stating the reality. Any branch that breaks off from the vine is dead. The only thing to do with it is use it for firewood. So the branches must remain connected to the vine. They must abide in the vine because only the vine gives the branches life. Jesus has been teaching his disciples how to abide in him for years now. His words have taken root in the disciples' hearts and minds. And whenever the disciples remember Jesus' words, meditate on them, talk about them with each other, and live out Jesus' words, they abide in him. And Jesus has shown the disciples how to abide in him only a couple of hours ago. He served them, taking the part of a slave to wash the disciples' feet, then said, "You also should do as I have done to you. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another." Whenever the disciples carry out Jesus' commandment of love, they abide in him. He doesn't have to be physically present for the disciples to abide in him. And anyway, Jesus won't leave the disciples alone. He has promised to send them another advocate, the Spirit of truth, that abides with the disciples to be with them forever. The advocate will help the disciples abide in the true vine, to stay connected to Jesus. Even after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension, he will never really leave the disciples. As long as they abide in him, he abides in them. And the disciples will bear much fruit, fruit that will last. The disciples' fruit isn't for their own benefit. They aren't going to eat these grapes themselves. Their fruit produces food and drink for others. Jesus came into the world because God so loved the world that God wished to save it, heal it, make it a new creation. While he's been in the world, Jesus has brought abundant life to the people he has met. The woman at the well, a man born blind, the lost sheep that the Good Shepherd has gone out to find. Jesus has formed relationships with these people, and that relationship has transformed them. Soon it will be the disciples' place to bring people into relationship with Jesus, that the world God so loves can become a new creation. And when the disciples abide in Jesus, when the branches remain connected to the true vine, they will bear fruit, and that fruit will give abundant life to the world. Abide in Jesus, and the disciples will have everything they need for the work God has given them to do. I don't know about you, but I find that a reassuring image as the end of the pandemic approaches. We had to reinvent pretty much everything a year ago. Another reinvention lies ahead of us at a time when many people are exhausted and depleted from the strain of the last year. The work that awaits us may seem overwhelming. But when we branches abide in the true vine, we receive abundant life. We abide in the vine through prayer and the sacraments and Bible study and loving service to others and life in Christian community, the spiritual practices we had a year ago and the ones we've adopted since then. And because we abide in the vine, we have everything we need to bear the fruit that gives life to the world. When you drive around wine country, you sometimes notice a vineyard of grapevines that are shorter than usual. They almost look hunched over compared to other vines. The stems are thicker than your arm. They don't need stakes, and the branches don't need the wires for support. These are the oldest vines, 50 years old or older. They have been pruned so often that the plant has stopped trying to grow out. It keeps all its growth close to the central stem. Grapevines reach their first harvest at 5 or 6 years old. Their yield begins to drop off between 20 and 30 years old. And by 50 years old, grapevines produce only a few bunches of grapes per year. But that fruit has the most concentrated, intense, rich flavors. It makes the best wines, like Old Vine Zinfandel from California and Old Vine Garnacha from Spain. That, dear ones, is what happens to us branches when we abide in the true vine for a long, long time. Our connection to the vine gives us everything we need for life. And after years of pruning, we naturally direct our energy towards bearing the very best fruit, the fruit that will last and give life to the world. So we abide in the vine, receiving abundant life from Jesus and sharing it with our hurting world.